The river's current was fierce, murky, and treacherous, fed by the intense rains of recent days. Ethan, a thin 13-year-old boy, was crouched by the riverbank, focused on collecting scraps of metal and recyclable materials, as he did every day to help his grandmother. His calloused hands rummaged through the mud while the icy water splashed against his bare feet. It was a lonely routine, but a necessary one. He knew that every small find could mean another meal or medicine for his ailing grandmother, who had cared for him since his parents passed away. The sound of the rushing water and the wind cutting across his face were his only companions in that desolate place. Suddenly, a sharp, desperate scream pierced the silence. Ethan looked up, his heart racing. A few meters downstream, he saw a girl struggling to stay afloat, her arms flailing frantically as the current dragged her away. Her cries were muffled by the force of the water, and Ethan realized she was drowning. Without hesitation, he dropped everything and ran toward the water. His thin frame seemed fragile, but Ethan didn't think about his own weakness, only about the desperation of saving that life. His feet sank into the muddy bank as he plunged into the icy water. The current pulled at his body, trying to drag him downstream, but he swam with all his strength, ignoring the cold that burned his muscles. When he finally reached the girl, she was no longer struggling. She was nearly submerged, her eyes closed and her face pale. With one final effort, Ethan grabbed her body and fought against the river's pull, dragging her to the surface. His breathing was labored, but he didn't stop. Every stroke was a battle. Every step toward the shore seemed impossible, but he persisted. When he finally reached the muddy ground, he dragged the girl out of the water, his lungs burning with exhaustion. He gently laid her on her side, watching as she coughed, and expelled the water she had swallowed. Life slowly returned to her face, and Ethan felt a profound sense of relief. It was then that he heard hurried, heavy footsteps approaching. A tall, well-dressed man, his face contorted with desperation, ran toward the girl. He fell to his knees, beside her, ignoring the mud that stained his expensive suit. "Emma, my daughter. Thank God." He hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face as he murmured words of relief. Michael, a wealthy and powerful man accustomed to controlling everything around him, felt a lump in his throat as he saw his daughter alive but vulnerable. He raised his eyes and saw Ethan standing there panting, his clothes soaked and torn, clinging to his thin, trembling frame. The boy looked exhausted, but his eyes held a determination Michael had never seen before. Approaching, still holding Emma, he murmured, You saved my daughter. I don't know how to thank you." Ethan simply nodded, his breathing still heavy. He wasn't used to receiving thanks. His life had always been about fighting without expecting anything in return. Michael, however, couldn't accept the idea of not repaying the boy in some way. He wiped his face, trying to regain his composure. "I'll reward you. Just tell me what you want, money, clothes, whatever it is." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I don't want money," he replied, his voice firm but calm. Michael looked visibly confused. He had expected the boy to ask for something material, something that could be easily solved. But the request that followed left him completely stunned. "What I want," Ethan said, looking Michael straight in the eyes, "is for you to spend one day with me." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Michael blinked, trying to process the request. "A day with you? That's all you want?" For Michael, a man used to transactions, business, and negotiations, the simplicity of the request was baffling. He looked at his daughter, now calmer in his arms, and then back at Ethan. There was something different about this boy. Something Michael couldn't quite grasp. As strange as the request was, Michael knew he couldn't refuse. "All right," he said, still not fully understanding the meaning behind it. "I'll spend a day with you." When the promised day arrived, the sun had barely risen. Michael parked his luxury car at the entrance to the neighborhood where Ethan lived. The contrast between the dirt streets, makeshift shacks, and the gleaming vehicle was stark. Michael stepped out of the car, feeling the eyes of the residents fixed on him, some curious, others wary. Ethan was waiting at the corner, wearing the same simple worn clothes. He gave a timid smile and waved at Michael, who walked toward him with hesitant steps. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked directly, as if he knew Michael still didn't understand the purpose of the day. Michael looked around, feeling out of place. "I don't know exactly what you expect from me, kid, but I'm here as promised." Without saying anything more, Ethan began leading him through the neighborhood. The narrow alleyways were bustling with life. Children played barefoot, laughing loudly as they ran through the trash and dust. Women chatted at the doors of their shacks, and the smell of simple food filled the air. Michael watched everything intently, but with unease. He was used to pristine and controlled environments, and the rawness of this reality unsettled him. Ethan took him to an open field, where several children were playing soccer with a patched-up ball. "These are my friends," Ethan said, pointing to the group. "We play here whenever we can. They help me forget about hunger, at least for a while." Michael observed the children running, sweaty and smiling, as if they were playing in a professional stadium. He couldn't understand how they could seem so happy amidst such hardship. One of the children approached and, to Michael's surprise, offered him the ball. He hesitated, but ended up kicking it back awkwardly. The children laughed, but not out of mockery. It was genuine laughter, full of joy. Later, Ethan took him to his home. It was a simple 2-room structure, with walls stained by moisture and an improvised roof. Inside, the smell of thin soup filled the small space. Ethan's grandmother, an elderly and frail woman, was sitting in a wooden chair, struggling to sew. Ethan approached her with care. "This is my grandma. She raised me since my parents died." Michael greeted her with a polite nod. He felt a pang in his chest as he looked at her. Ethan continued, "She's sick, but we don't have money for expensive medicine. The doctor at the clinic helps us when he can." Michael, who had always had access to the best hospitals, felt small in the face of this reality. Despite her fragility, the grandmother smiled at him, a smile full of dignity. "Sometimes the best way to give back isn't with what you have, but with what you learn," she said with a wisdom that deeply moved him. After a simple meal, Michael and Ethan went for a walk to a nearby hill. There, under the setting sun, Ethan finally explained the reason for his request. "I didn't ask for money because money can't buy what really matters. I wanted you to see how we live. I wanted you to understand that, even with so little, we're happy because we have each other." Ethan's words hit Michael like a blow. He thought about his own life, about how he had grown distant from his daughter, trying to compensate for his absence with gifts and material possessions. For the first time, Michael realized that despite all the money he had, he was poor in something essential: time and affection. When the day ended, Michael returned home with Emma, determined to change. He began dedicating more time to her, prioritizing simple moments and conversations. He also returned to Ethan's neighborhood, bringing food and medicine for his grandmother. Over time, he offered Ethan a scholarship, believing education would be the greatest gift he could give. Ethan accepted but never abandoned his roots. He graduated, helped his community, and, together with Michael, built a new library for the neighborhood's children. Years later, as Michael watched Ethan deliver a speech at the library's inauguration, he realized that the greatest gift from that day at the river wasn't saving his daughter, but being saved by a boy who taught him the true meaning of wealth. Ethan, now a young adult, smiled at Michael and Emma, knowing that the cycle of generosity and transformation would continue. The greatest lesson Michael learned on that simple but profound day was that love and time are the greatest riches anyone can offer, and it changed their lives forever.